Hello, and welcome to Day by Day True Crime Stories, the podcast where we explore a different crime or justice milestone from this day in history. I'm your host, Kona Gallagher, and today is March 4th. On this day in 1995, public trust in law enforcement was shattered, and New Orleans was left reeling when Antoinette Frank, a New Orleans police officer, committed an unthinkable crime, a brutal robbery and triple homicide inside of a local restaurant. The case exposed major failures in the police hiring process and devastated innocent families, including the family of a fellow officer who had no idea that his colleague would be the one to take his life. How does someone go from upholding the law to breaking it in the worst way imaginable? What warning signs were ignored, and how did this case change the New Orleans Police Department? For those answers, we're going to have to go back to the beginning. Let's get started. Before she was a murderer, Antoinette Frank was just another aspiring police officer. She was born on April 30th, 1971 in Opelousas, Louisiana. Her early life was difficult and was marked by a troubled relationship with her father, who was reportedly controlling and abusive. Frank dreamed of becoming a police officer and saw it as a way to gain control and have authority in her own life. But even before she joined the force, there were warning signs. When Frank first applied to the New Orleans Police Department, NOPD, in early 1993, she failed multiple psychiatric evaluations. One psychologist determined that she was too emotionally unstable to handle the stress of police work. But the NOPD was desperate for officers at the time. They were losing officers left and right. Nobody wanted to come work for them because they paid less than other departments in the area. They were also making an effort to recruit Black officers, thinking that it would help ease some of the racial tensions in the city. So, despite her failed psychological screenings, the NOPD hired her anyway. Antoinette Frank graduated from the police academy in 1993, and on the surface, she seemed like a hardworking officer. Or at least, she was trying to be a hardworking officer. Either way, her colleagues quickly noticed that something was off. Fellow officers described her as socially awkward, indecisive, and emotionally unstable. Some supervisors even considered sending her back to the police academy because she struggled with basic police work. Still, she remained on the force, and by 1994, she was even praised for her work in the community, earning the Officer of the Month award from the local Kiwanis Club. So while Antoinette may not have been great at her job, it didn't seem as though she was out there committing crimes. But everything changed for Antoinette Frank when she met Rogers Lucchese, a teenage drug dealer who would later become her lover, her accomplice, and ultimately her downfall. Frank first met Lucchese in November 1994 when she responded to a shooting incident. Lucchese, then 18 years old, had been wounded in a street altercation, and Frank took his statement. But instead of treating him like a criminal, she saw something else. And soon after, Frank and Lucchese became inseparable, to the point where her colleagues began to notice. First, Lucchese was seen driving Frank's personal car around New Orleans. Then he was spotted moving her police cruiser at an accident scene, which is wild and obviously something only other police officers are supposed to be able to do. Lucchese was with Antoinette so often that on multiple occasions she introduced him as her trainee, and at one point she lied and claimed that he was her nephew. It was more than an inappropriate relationship. Frank and Lucchese eventually allegedly used her police status to commit crimes. Reports emerged that the two were pulling people over, pretending to conduct a normal police stop, but then would rob them. Despite suspicions from other officers, Frank remained on the force. And by early 1995, she and Lucchese were planning something even bigger, an armed robbery. On the night of March 4th, 1995, Antoinette Frank and Rogers Lucchese set their plan into motion. Their target was Kim On, a Vietnamese restaurant in New Orleans East. Frank knew the owners well and had done security work there before. She also knew that they kept large amounts of cash on the premises. That night, as the restaurant was closing, Frank and Lucchese entered the building. Among those inside were Officer Ronald A. Williams II, an NOPD officer working an off-duty security shift, Ha Vu, 24, the restaurant owner's daughter, Quang Vu, Ha's younger brother, Cha Vu, another sibling who was in the kitchen at the time, and Quoc Vu, another sibling who was also in the kitchen. Frank came in and greeted everyone casually. She had been in a couple times already that night to eat, but Chow later said that she felt something was wrong right away. So when she saw Frank approaching, she actually hid their money in the microwave. And it turns out her suspicions were right. Soon after they entered, Lucchese pulled out a gun and shot Officer Williams in the neck, paralyzing him instantly. Once Williams collapsed to the floor, gasping for air, Lucchese shot him several more times, killing him. Then, Frank and Lucchese turned their weapons on the Vu family. Ha Vu begged for her life, but Frank shot her in the head, killing her instantly. Quang Vu was just 17 years old, and he was shot 6 times before collapsing on the restaurant floor. Cha Vu, who had been in the kitchen when all this was starting, had actually run for her life, so she took the others who were in the kitchen, her brother Quoc and another employee, and hid in the walk-in refrigerator. After finding the money that had been hidden in the microwave, Frank and Lucchese fled, believing that everyone inside was dead. But they were wrong. Cha Vu emerged from the refrigerator and ran to call 911. Police responded within minutes. What's wild, though, is that while Frank and Lucchese did make a clean getaway, Frank came back. She heard the call come in on her police radio and, still in her police uniform, went back to the scene, hoping to beat the actual responding officers so that she could eliminate the living witnesses. But she was too late. The actual responding officers were already there, and when Cha Vu saw Frank again, she screamed in terror and told the officers that she was the one who killed everybody. Frank was immediately handcuffed and arrested. Lucchese was located and arrested later that night. The trial was swift. The jury only deliberated for 22 minutes before returning a guilty verdict. On October 20th, 1995, Antoinette Frank was sentenced to death. Though her death warrant was signed twice, Frank avoided execution. Then, Louisiana stopped performing executions altogether in 2010, but in 2025, they're scheduled to start up again. As of this recording, Antoinette Frank remains on death row, only one of 2 women awaiting execution in the state of Louisiana. Thank you for joining me on today's episode of Day by Day True Crime Stories. If you found this story compelling, please subscribe, rate, and review our podcast. And be sure to join me again tomorrow as we explore another significant event in true crime history. Until then, stay safe and remember that behind every headline is a life worth remembering. Day by Day True Crime Stories is a Little Monster production.
Hey, you can do it!